The smoke from the burning letters curled into the Nevada sky like dying prayers, and Rebecca Lynn watched from behind the rain barrel as three outlaws laughed while her mother's final words turned to ash in their filthy hands. She pressed her palm against her mouth to keep from crying out, her whole body trembling as the men rifled through the rest of her belongings scattered across the dusty ground outside the boarding house. The letters, all 17 of them, written by her mother during the final months of consumption before she died last winter, were the only pieces of her Rebecca had left. Now they were gone, consumed by flames and cruelty. Nothing but paper and women's foolishness, one of the men said, his voice rough as gravel. He wore a torn vest and had a scar running down his left cheek. Thought she'd have money hidden somewhere. The landlady said she paid up front for 3 months. Another one growled. This one was tall and lean, with mean eyes that made Rebecca's stomach turn. Said she came from back east with inheritance money. Well, it ain't here, the third one spat, kicking over her small trunk. Her few dresses tumbled out onto the dirt. Just clothes and these stupid letters. Waste of time, Burke. Burke, the one with the scar, shrugged and ground the last burning pieces of paper under his boot heel. Let's move on. Maybe try that ranch house outside town. Rebecca waited until their horses disappeared down the main road before she emerged from her hiding spot. Her legs nearly gave out as she stumbled to the pile of ash that had been her most precious possessions. She fell to her knees, her vision blurring with tears as she reached out with shaking fingers. A few fragments remained, small pieces with her mother's handwriting barely visible. My dearest daughter, on one. Always remember on another. Nothing more. The boarding house door opened behind her. Mrs. Patterson, the landlady, stood wringing her hands. Oh, Miss Lynn, I'm so sorry. I was in town getting supplies when they came. I shouldn't have told anyone about your circumstances. I didn't think anyone was listening at the general store. Rebecca couldn't find words. She carefully gathered the few fragments that remained, holding them as gently as she would have held a wounded bird. Those were the Talbot Gang, Mrs. Patterson continued, her voice tight with worry. They've been terrorizing folks between here and Carson City for months now. The sheriff won't do anything because Burke Talbot's cousin sits on the territorial council. They think they're untouchable. Something hard and cold settled in Rebecca's chest, pushing past the grief. Her mother's letters had contained more than just loving words. They had held advice, stories about Rebecca's father, who died before she was born, family recipes, descriptions of her childhood home in Pennsylvania. They were her history, her connection to where she came from. And 3 cruel men had destroyed them without a second thought, looking for money they could spend on whiskey and cards. She stood up slowly, tucking the fragments carefully into the pocket of her dress. Where can I find the Talbot Gang? Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened. Now, Miss Lynn, you can't be thinking of confronting them. They're dangerous men. They'd as soon shoot you as look at you. I need to know where they go. The older woman hesitated, then sighed. They have a camp somewhere in the hills northeast of here, or so folks say. They come into Gold Creek every few weeks to spend their stolen money. But please, dear, don't do anything foolish. Those letters are gone, and nothing will bring them back. Rebecca walked past her into the boarding house, her jaw set. Mrs. Patterson was wrong. The letters were gone, but that didn't mean those men should get away with what they'd done. She had come to Nevada territory 6 weeks ago to start fresh after her mother's death, to escape the pitying looks and the marriage proposals from men who wanted her small inheritance more than they wanted her. She had thought she could build a new life here, maybe find work as a school teacher once the town grew large enough to need one. Now all she could think about was the casual cruelty in those men's laughter as they burned the last connection to her mother. She spent the rest of the day trying to compose herself, trying to figure out what she could possibly do. She was a 22-year-old woman, alone in a rough territory town, with no family, limited funds, and no real plan. The practical part of her mind said to let it go, to count herself lucky they hadn't found her hiding behind the barrel. The rest of her, the part that sounded like her mother's voice telling her to stand up for what was right, couldn't accept that. As evening fell, Rebecca walked to the small saloon at the end of Gold Creek's main street. She had never been inside such an establishment before, but she had heard that men talked freely in saloons, especially about outlaws in trouble. Maybe someone there would know more about the Talbot Gang. Maybe someone would even care that they were terrorizing innocent people. The saloon was exactly what she expected: rough wooden walls, a long bar, tables filled with miners and drifters, smoke hanging heavy in the air. Conversation died when she walked in. Every eye turned toward her. The bartender, a heavy-set man with impressive mutton chops, frowned. "Madam, this ain't a place for ladies." "I'm looking for information," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady. "About the Talbot Gang." A few men laughed. One called out, "Information ain't free, sweetheart." "What's your business with them?" the bartender asked, his tone slightly less hostile, but still wary. Before Rebecca could answer, the door opened behind her. She turned to see a tall man enter, broad-shouldered and dusty from the trail. He wore a worn brown hat pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair and striking blue eyes. There was something different about him compared to the other men in the saloon, a quietness, a control in how he moved. He looked to be in his mid-20s with a strong jaw, shadowed by a few days of stubble. "Isaac Harrison," the bartender said with noticeably more respect. "Didn't expect to see you back in Gold Creek so soon." The man called Isaac nodded to the bartender, then his gaze found Rebecca. Something flickered in his expression, concern maybe, or curiosity. "Evening," he said simply. Rebecca felt the weight of the moment. Every instinct told her this man was different from the others, that he might actually listen. "The Talbot Gang robbed me today," she said, addressing him directly. "They burned letters from my dead mother. I want to find them." The saloon went completely silent. Isaac studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face. Then he said quietly, "Step outside with me, madam. We should talk where there are fewer ears." She followed him out into the cooling evening air. The sun was setting behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Isaac walked a few paces from the saloon entrance before turning to face her. "Isaac Harrison," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Most folks call me Isaac. Rebecca Lynn." She met his gaze directly, even though her heart was pounding. "And I meant what I said. Those men destroyed something irreplaceable. I believe you." His voice was calm, but she could hear the steel underneath. "Burke Talbot and his boys have been running wild for too long. The law won't touch them because Burke's got connections. But that doesn't mean they should get away with what they do." "You sound like you know them." Isaac's jaw tightened. "I know them. Burke Talbot murdered my partner last year during a robbery. Shot him in the back while Tom was trying to protect a family they were terrorizing. I've been tracking them ever since, but they're careful. They move around, never stay in one place too long." Rebecca felt a chill run through her. "The landlady said they have a camp in the hills." "They do, but it changes location. I've found 3 different sites in the past 6 months." He paused, studying her again. "Miss Lynn, I understand your anger, but going after the Talbot Gang is dangerous work. These aren't men who'll show mercy because you're a woman." "I don't expect mercy. I expect justice." Something shifted in Isaac's expression, a glimmer of respect, maybe even understanding. "I've been working as a deputy marshal in this territory for 3 years. Tom and I were partners, friends since we were boys back in Missouri. When he died, I made a promise I'd see the Talbot Gang answer for their crimes. So far, I haven't been able to keep it." "Then let me help you," Rebecca said, the words coming out before she could second-guess them. Isaac shook his head. "No offense, madam, but what happened to you today is exactly why you should stay far away from them. They burned my mother's letters. 17 letters she wrote me while she was dying. Letters about my father, about her life, about everything I'd never get the chance to ask her. Rebecca's voice broke slightly, but she pushed through. Those men took that from me like it was nothing, like it was garbage. I can't just let that go. Isaac was quiet for a moment, looking out at the darkening landscape. Finally, he said, I'm heading out tomorrow to track them. I got word they hit a ranch near Taylorsville yesterday. If I can pick up their trail, maybe I can finally corner them. He looked back at her. You should stay here where it's safe. I'm coming with you, Miss Lynn. Rebecca, and I mean it. I can ride, I can shoot, and I can take care of myself. You don't have to protect me. I just want to see those men face consequences for what they've done. Isaac studied her face in the fading light, and Rebecca held his gaze, refusing to back down. She could see him weighing the decision, measuring her determination against his obvious reluctance to put her in danger. Can you really shoot? He asked finally. My father was a soldier. My mother made sure I knew how to handle a rifle before I was 12 years old. She said a woman needed to know how to protect herself. Another long moment passed. Then Isaac nodded slowly. All right, but you follow my lead. And if I say run, you run. Understood? Understood. We leave at first light. Bring whatever you need for several days on the trail. It won't be comfortable. Rebecca felt a surge of determination mixed with fear. She was really going to do this. She was going to track down the men who had burned her mother's letters, and somehow she was going to make them understand what they had taken from her. Thank you, she said quietly. Isaac tipped his hat. Don't thank me yet. This might be the most foolish thing either of us has ever done. But there was something in his eyes that suggested he understood exactly why she needed to do it. Rebecca barely slept that night. She lay in her small room at the boarding house, staring at the ceiling and thinking about what lay ahead. The fragments of her mother's letters rested on the table beside her bed, and she found herself reaching for them repeatedly, running her fingers over the barely visible ink. Her mother had been a strong woman, raising Rebecca alone after her father died in the war. She had worked as a seamstress, taking in mending and making dresses for the wealthy ladies in Philadelphia. She had taught Rebecca to read and write, to do arithmetic, to think for herself. When the consumption took hold, she had faced it with the same quiet strength she had shown through everything else, writing those letters even when holding a pen exhausted her. Be brave, my darling girl, one of the letters had said. Rebecca remembered that line perfectly. The world will try to make you small and scared. Don't let it. You have your father's courage and my stubbornness. Use them both. Rebecca intended to do exactly that. She rose before dawn and dressed in her most practical clothing, a simple brown skirt and white blouse with her sturdiest boots. She packed a small bag with extra clothes, her mother's silver locket, the letter fragments wrapped carefully in cloth, some food from Mrs. Patterson's kitchen, and her father's old pistol. The gun was heavy in her hands, but familiar. She loaded it carefully, remembering her mother's instructions about always checking the chamber, always knowing exactly how many bullets she had. Isaac was waiting outside the boarding house when she emerged into the gray pre-dawn light. He had 2 horses saddled and ready, a large bay gelding that was obviously his, and a smaller chestnut mare. Borrowed the mare from the livery, he said. Tom's horse. The owner's been keeping her for me. She's steady and won't spook easy. Rebecca approached the mare slowly, letting the horse sniff her hand before stroking her neck. What's her name? Cinnamon. Tom named her. They mounted up as the sun began to break over the horizon. Gold Creek was still mostly asleep, just a few early risers beginning to stir. Isaac led the way northeast, toward the hills he had mentioned. For the first hour, they rode in silence. Rebecca focused on getting comfortable in the saddle, on remembering how to move with the horse's rhythm. It had been months since she had ridden, not since before her mother got really sick. You doing all right? Isaac asked, glancing back at her. Fine, Rebecca said, which was mostly true. Her muscles were already starting to protest, but she would manage. It's about 3 hours to where they hit that ranch. We'll see if we can pick up their trail from there. You've done this a lot? Tracking? Isaac nodded. Tom and I learned from an old scout when we first came west. said we needed to know the land if we were going to survive as lawmen out here. He was right. Tell me about Tom, Rebecca said. She wanted to understand who Isaac was, what drove him. Understanding him might help her understand what they were about to do. Isaac was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, Tom Bridges. We grew up together in a little town outside St. Louis. When the war came, we were too young to fight. By the time we were old enough, it was over. We headed west, looking for adventure, I suppose. Found work as deputies in different towns, eventually got appointed as deputy marshals for the territory. He adjusted his hat, and Rebecca could see the tension in his shoulders. Tom was the better man of the two of us, more patient, more willing to see the good in people. When we came across that family being robbed, he stepped in without hesitation. Burke Talbot shot him while Tom was helping the mother get her children to safety. By the time I got there, Tom was already dead and the Talbot gang was riding off. I'm sorry, Rebecca said softly. He deserved better. They all do everyone the Talbot gang has hurt. Isaac looked back at her again. That's why I can't let it go. Not until they face justice. Rebecca understood that completely. It was the same thing driving her forward, even though her hands were shaking slightly on the reins, and part of her mind was screaming that this was crazy. They rode on, climbing gradually into the hills. The landscape changed from flat desert to rolling terrain dotted with sage and scattered pines. It was beautiful in a stark way, and Rebecca found herself thinking how her mother would have loved to see it. She had talked about the West sometimes, about the open spaces and the possibility of starting fresh. The sun was well up when Isaac slowed his horse, his posture changing. He was reading the land now, watching for signs. Rebecca followed his gaze, but couldn't see what he was looking for. There, he said finally, pointing to a spot where the brush looked disturbed. Horses passed through here, maybe yesterday. He dismounted and examined the ground more closely, moving slowly and carefully. Rebecca watched him, impressed by the way he seemed to read information from the dirt and broken plants that she couldn't see at all. 4 horses, Isaac said. Moving at a walk, not hurrying. They came from the direction of that ranch and headed deeper into the hills. He looked up at her. Could be them. Could be someone else. But it's worth following. They continued on foot for a while, leading the horses and following the trail Isaac had found. Rebecca's heart was beating faster now. They were really doing this. They were really tracking outlaws. The trail led them up into a narrow canyon. Isaac moved more cautiously now, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Rebecca tried to copy his careful steps, her own hand on the gun in her bag. This is the kind of place they like, Isaac said quietly. Easy to defend, hard to approach without being seen. We need to be careful. They tethered the horses in a sheltered spot and continued on foot. The canyon walls rose higher on either side, red rock that looked ancient and weathered. Rebecca's boots made small sounds on the loose stones, and she tried to place her feet more carefully. Isaac held up his hand suddenly, and they both froze. He pointed ahead, and Rebecca saw its smoke rising from somewhere beyond the next bend in the canyon, a campfire. Her pulse was hammering now. This was real. They had found them. Isaac motioned for her to stay low, and they crept forward until they could see around the bend. There, in a widening of the canyon, was a rough camp. 3 men sat around a fire, and Rebecca recognized them immediately. Burke with his scar, the tall, mean-looking one. The third, who had kicked over her trunk. Rage flared hot and sudden in her chest. Those men sitting there without a care, while her mother's letters were ash scattered in Gold Creek. Isaac's hand on her arm stopped her from moving forward. He shook his head firmly, then gestured for them to retreat back down the canyon. Once they were far enough away that voices wouldn't carry, he said, 3 of them, just like you said, but there could be more around somewhere. The smart thing to do is ride back to Gold Creek and come back with more men. They'll be gone by then, Rebecca protested. You said they never stay in one place long. I know, but going in there with just the 2 of us is dangerous. These are killers, Rebecca. She heard the shift he was using her first name now, not the formal Miss Lynn. Something had changed between them during the ride. Some barrier had come down. What if we wait until dark? She suggested. They might get careless, let their guard down. Isaac considered this, clearly torn. That's still risky, but it might give us a better chance. He looked at her seriously. You understand that if this goes wrong, we could both die? I understand, but I can't walk away. Not now that we've found them. He nodded slowly. All right, we wait until dark, but we do this smart. We're not heroes trying to prove anything. We get them to surrender if we can, shoot only if we have to. Agreed? Agreed. They spent the rest of the day hidden in a cluster of rocks where they could watch the canyon entrance. Rebecca was acutely aware of Isaac beside her, the quiet competence in how he moved, the careful way he watched everything. He shared his canteen and some dried meat he had brought, and they talked in low voices to pass the time. How did you end up in Gold Creek? He asked. After my mother died, I couldn't stay in Philadelphia. Too many memories. A friend of hers lived out here and wrote that there were opportunities for school teachers. I thought I could start over. She smiled bitterly. I've been here 6 weeks, and already I'm hiding in rocks, waiting to confront outlaws. Not quite the fresh start you planned. No, but maybe it's what I needed. Rebecca looked at him. What about you? Why stay out here hunting the Talbot Gang instead of going back to Missouri? There's nothing for me there. My folks died when I was young. Tom was my only real family. Isaac's voice was quiet. Out here, I can make a difference. Not a big one, maybe, but something. Tom believed the law should protect everyone, not just people with money and connections. I want to honor that. The sun moved across the sky as they waited. Rebecca found herself watching Isaac as much as she watched the canyon. There was something steady about him, something that made her feel safer even in this dangerous situation. He wasn't trying to talk her out of being here anymore, wasn't treating her like she needed protecting. He was treating her like a partner. As darkness finally began to fall, Isaac checked his gun and looked at her. You ready? Rebecca's mouth was dry, but she nodded. Ready. They moved quietly back up the canyon, using the growing shadows for cover. The outlaws' fire was bright now against the darkness, making it harder for them to see into the surrounding area. That would work in their favor. Isaac positioned them behind large rocks about 30 feet from the camp. Rebecca could hear the outlaws talking, laughing about something. The casual normalness of it made her anger flare again. Burke Talbot! Isaac called out suddenly, his voice strong and clear. This is Deputy Marshal Isaac Harrison. You and your men are under arrest. Put your hands up and step away from your weapons. The camp exploded into motion. All 3 men grabbed for their guns. Burke rolled behind his saddle. The tall one dropped flat. The third dove toward the rocks. Last chance, Isaac shouted. Nivi. Surrender now. Burke's answer was a gunshot that ricocheted off the rocks near Isaac's head. Rebecca ducked instinctively, her heart racing. Isaac returned fire, but carefully, aiming high warning shots. I've got men surrounding this canyon, he shouted, which Rebecca knew was a lie. You can't escape. Give up. Another shot from Burke, this one closer. Isaac pulled Rebecca down further behind the rocks. Stay low, he said urgently. The tall outlaw was trying to circle around to get a better angle on them. Rebecca saw him moving through the shadows, and without thinking, she aimed her father's pistol and fired. The shot went wide, but it made the man dive for cover and abandon his flanking attempt. I see her, Burke shouted. It's that girl from Gold Creek. You brought a woman to do marshal work, Harrison? This woman is about to see you hang, Rebecca shouted back, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. Burke laughed. For what? Burning some old letters? That ain't a hanging offense. For murder, Isaac called out. For killing Tom Bridges. For robbery, assault, and terrorizing innocent people across this territory. You've got a long list of crimes, Burke. You can't prove nothing. I can prove enough, and your cousin's influence won't reach into a federal court, which is where you're headed. More shots were exchanged. Rebecca tried to track where each outlaw was, tried to remember everything her mother had taught her about staying calm in danger. The night was alive with noise gunfire, shouting, the sound of bullets hitting rock. Then she heard Isaac grunt beside her, and her blood went cold. Are you hit? Just a graze. I'm fine. But she could see, even in the darkness, that he was holding his left arm awkwardly. Rage replaced her fear. These men had burned her mother's letters. They had killed Isaac's partner. And now they had hurt Isaac. She had come out here thinking she wanted justice, but in that moment she wanted them to pay. She leaned around the rock and fired 3 quick shots toward where she had last seen Burke. One of them must have come close because she heard him curse. "You've got spirit, girl," Burke called out. "But you're outgunned and outmatched. Tell you what, you and the marshal ride out of here now, and we'll let you live. This doesn't have to end bad for everyone." "I'm not leaving," Rebecca shouted back. Isaac was reloading his gun with his right hand, his left still pressed against his arm. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "he might be right. We tried. We can come back with help." "No." She reloaded her own gun, her hands steady despite the fear. "They don't get to walk away again." Something in her voice must have convinced him because he nodded. Then he called out, "Burke, you know how this ends. You can come in alive or dead. But you're coming in. Make this easier on everyone and surrender." The answer was another volley of gunfire. But Rebecca noticed something. The third outlaw, the one who had kicked her trunk, was trying to sneak toward their horses. If he got mounted and escaped, he could bring help for Burke and the tall one. She made a split-second decision. While Isaac kept Burke pinned down with covering fire, she ran low and fast toward where they had left Cinnamon and the bay. She heard Isaac shout her name, but she didn't stop. The outlaw heard her coming and spun around, his gun rising. Rebecca didn't give him time to aim. She fired twice, and he went down with a cry of pain, clutching his leg. She reached the horses and untied them, leading them further back down the canyon, where the third outlaw couldn't reach them even if he recovered. When she made it back to Isaac, he looked at her with an expression somewhere between anger and admiration. "Don't ever do that again," he said tightly. "He was going for the horses." "I know, that was still reckless." But his tone softened. "Good shooting." With their escape route cut off and one of their men wounded, Burke and the tall outlaw were in a worse position. Isaac kept up the pressure, calling out that they were surrounded, that more lawmen were coming, that they had no chance. Finally, as the moon rose higher, Burke shouted, all right, we're done." "Throw out your weapons," Isaac ordered. "All of them. Then step into the firelight with your hands up." Slowly, carefully, guns were tossed out into the open. Then Burke and the tall outlaw emerged with their hands raised. Rebecca kept her gun trained on them as Isaac moved forward, moving stiffly because of his wounded arm. He bound their hands with rope from his saddlebags while Rebecca watched for any sign of treachery. Then they secured the third outlaw, who was still cursing and bleeding from his leg wound. "You won't get away with this," Burke said, his scarred face twisted with anger. "My cousin—" "Your cousin has no authority over federal marshals," Isaac said firmly. "You're going to Carson City to face a judge, and if there's any justice, you'll swing for what you've done." Rebecca looked at the 3 men who had caused her so much pain. They looked smaller now, less threatening, just mean, petty criminals who hurt people because they could. She had wanted them to understand what they had taken from her, but looking at them now, she realized they probably never would. Men like this didn't think about the lives they destroyed, but she had stopped them. She and Isaac together had made sure they wouldn't hurt anyone else. "We need to get you looked at," she said to Isaac, noting how pale he was looking. "It can wait until we get these 3 secured properly." But his voice was strained. They spent the next hour making sure the outlaws were bound and couldn't escape, tending to the third one's leg wound just enough to stop the bleeding, and preparing to move them back to Gold Creek at first light. Finally, Rebecca convinced Isaac to let her examine his arm. The bullet had carved a furrow across his upper arm, deep enough to bleed freely, but not life-threatening. She tore strips from her spare blouse and bound it as carefully as she could. "Your mother teach you this too?" Isaac asked, watching her face as she worked. "She taught me a lot of things. How to be strong, how to stand up for myself, how to not let the world make me small." Rebecca's voice caught slightly. "I wish she could have seen what happened tonight. She would have been proud." "I think she would have been terrified and proud in equal measure," Isaac said gently. "Like I am right now." Rebecca looked up and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. His eyes were very blue in the firelight, and there was something in them she hadn't seen before, something that made her pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with danger. "You were amazing out there," he continued quietly. "Brave and smart and absolutely terrifying. I've worked with trained lawmen who wouldn't have handled themselves as well. I was scared the whole time. So was I. But you didn't let that stop you." His right hand came up, his fingers brushing her cheek very gently. "Thank you for not listening when I told you to stay behind. Thank you for letting me come." They were very close now, close enough that Rebecca could see the stubble on his jaw, the small scar above his eyebrow, the way his lips were slightly parted. Her heart was hammering again, but this time it had nothing to do with outlaws or danger. Isaac leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't want to. His lips met hers softly, questioningly, and Rebecca felt something warm and bright unfold in her chest. She kissed him back, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart beating as fast as hers. When they finally pulled apart, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. That was probably not appropriate given the circumstances. "I don't care about appropriate," Rebecca whispered. "I care about honest." And that felt very honest. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face. It was very honest. They sat together by the fire, while the three outlaws slept, under guard, in turn. Rebecca leaned against Isaac's good shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. It felt right in a way she couldn't quite explain, like something had clicked into place that she hadn't even known was missing. "What happens after we get them to Carson City?" she asked quietly. "There'll be a trial. I'll have to testify. You probably will too if you're willing." "I'm willing. I want to see this through." Isaac was quiet for a moment. "And after that? I don't know. I suppose I still need to figure out what I'm doing with my life." She looked up at him. "What about you?" "I've been so focused on catching the Talbot Gang, I haven't thought much past that." His arm tightened around her. "But I'm thinking about it now." Rebecca smiled and settled closer against him. The night air was cool, and the fire was warm, and despite everything that had happened, she felt safer than she had in months. Maybe safer than she had since her mother died. They took turns keeping watch through the rest of the night. When dawn broke over the canyon, they got the outlaws mounted on their horses, hands bound and tied to their saddles so they couldn't escape. The third one could barely sit upright with his wounded leg, but Burke and the tall one whose name Rebecca learned was Jack Stanton were surly and uncooperative. The ride back to Gold Creek took most of the day. They moved slowly because of the wounded outlaw and because they had to stay alert for any attempt at escape. But Burke and his men seemed to have accepted their fate. They were caught, and they knew it. They arrived in Gold Creek just before sunset. News of their arrival spread quickly, and soon half the town was gathered in the street, staring at the notorious Talbot Gang, bound and under arrest. The local sheriff, a portly man named Collins, who had refused to act against Burke before, came out of his office looking nervous. "Marshal Harrison, I heard you'd gone after them." "I found them," Isaac said flatly. "They'll be transported to Carson City for trial. I'll need you to hold them in your jail until I can arrange transport." "Now, Marshal, we should talk about this." There's nothing to talk about, Sheriff. These men are under federal arrest. You will hold them, or I will arrest you for obstruction of justice. Isaac's voice was steel. Collins swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, sir, of course. They transferred the prisoners to the jail, and Isaac made sure they were secured properly before allowing the local doctor to tend to the wounded one's leg. Rebecca waited outside, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The adrenaline that had carried her through the past day and night was draining away, leaving her shaky and drained. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her elbow. Miss Lynn, dear heavens, child, the whole town's been talking about how you rode out after the Talbot Gang with Marshal Harrison. Are you all right? I'm fine, Rebecca said automatically. Then more honestly, I'm tired and sore, but fine. Come back to the boarding house. You need food and rest. Rebecca shook her head. I need to wait for Isaac, for Marshal Harrison. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose knowingly. I see. Well then, I'll bring food for both of you. You can't live on air and righteousness. She bustled off, and Rebecca found herself smiling despite her exhaustion. When Isaac emerged from the jail a few minutes later, he looked as tired as she felt, but he smiled when he saw her. You waited. Of course I waited. He took her hand, right there in front of the gathered townspeople, and Rebecca felt a little thrill at the public claim. Let them see. Let them know she had chosen this man, and he had chosen her. They ate the food Mrs. Patterson brought, sitting on the steps of the jail as the sun finished setting. Isaac's arm was properly bandaged now, thanks to the doctor, and some color had returned to his face. I need to send a telegram to Carson City, he said. Let them know about the arrests. They'll send someone to transport the prisoners within a few days. And then, he looked at her, his blue eyes serious. And then I'd like to court you properly, Rebecca Lynn, if you'll let me. Her heart did a little skip. I think I'd like that very much, Isaac Harrison. Even knowing that my job takes me all over the territory, that I'm gone more than I'm home. Where is home? She asked. He shrugged. I've been moving around so much I'm not sure I have one anymore. I've got a little cabin near Carson City that I use between assignments, but it's not much. Maybe it could be more, Rebecca said softly. Maybe it could be somewhere worth coming back to. The look he gave her was full of hope and something deeper, something that made her breath catch. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Isaac had to write detailed reports about the capture, and Rebecca had to give her own statement about what the Talbot Gang had done to her. The whole story came out, how they had burned her mother's letters, how she and Isaac had tracked them down, how they had captured them together. Some people in Gold Creek thought she was crazy. Others thought she was brave. Rebecca didn't much care what they thought. She had done what she needed to do, and she had stopped 3 cruel men from hurting anyone else. That was enough. Federal marshals arrived from Carson City 4 days later to transport the prisoners. Isaac went with them to ensure the transfer went smoothly and to testify at the preliminary hearing. He asked Rebecca to come with him. I know it's a lot to ask, he said the night before they were set to leave, but I don't want to be apart from you. Not now. Rebecca didn't want that either. She packed her few belongings, paid Mrs. Patterson for her room, and mounted Cinnamon early the next morning for the ride to Carson City. The city was larger than Gold Creek, with real streets and brick buildings, and even a proper courthouse. The trial was scheduled for 2 weeks after their arrival, which gave Rebecca and Isaac time to settle in. Isaac's cabin was indeed small, just 2 rooms, sparsely furnished, but it had potential. Rebecca could see it as she looked around. Curtains on the windows, a proper table instead of the rough board and sawhorses Isaac was using. Maybe a garden in the patch of earth out front. I know it's not much, Isaac said, watching her face anxiously. It's a start, Rebecca said. She turned to him and smiled. Everything is just a start, Isaac. We make it into what we want it to be. Over the next 2 weeks, they did exactly that. Rebecca sewed curtains from fabric she bought in town. Isaac built a real table with a carpenter's help. They planted vegetables in the front garden, tomatoes and beans and squash. Rebecca found work helping at a local school, and the headmaster hinted that they might have a permanent position opening in the fall. In the evenings, they sat outside and talked. Isaac told her stories about his childhood, about Tom, about the places he had been in the territory. Rebecca told him about her mother, about Philadelphia, about the life she had left behind. "Do you miss it?" he asked one evening as the sun set behind the mountains. "I miss my mother," Rebecca said honestly. "I'll always miss her. But the rest of it? No. I think I was waiting for something without knowing what it was. And then I came here and found it." "Found what?" "Purpose, freedom, you." She leaned against his shoulder. "The chance to be more than I was." Isaac kissed the top of her head. "I found that too. I've been so focused on revenge for Tom that I forgot there could be anything else. You reminded me." The trial was difficult. Rebecca had to testify about what the Talbot Gang had done to her, and it meant reliving that awful day. But Isaac was there, sitting in the courtroom, and every time she felt overwhelmed, she looked at him and found strength. Isaac's testimony about Tom's murder was even harder to watch. She could see the pain in every word, the weight of loss he had been carrying. When he finished, he looked exhausted and raw. But the jury believed them. They also believed the testimony from a half-dozen other victims who came forward once they heard the Talbot Gang had been arrested. Burke Talbot, Jack Stanton, and the third man, whose name was Carl Webb, were found guilty on multiple counts of robbery, assault, and murder. Burke was sentenced to hang. The other two received long prison sentences. When the verdict was read, Isaac's hand found Rebecca's, and they held on tight to each other. It was over. The men who had burned her mother's letters, who had killed Tom Bridges, who had terrorized innocent people across the territory, they were finally facing justice. That night, Isaac and Rebecca walked along the edge of Carson City, looking up at the stars. "Tom would have liked you," Isaac said quietly. "He always said I needed someone who wouldn't put up with my moody silences, someone who'd challenge me. I think I would have liked him too. I've been carrying his death around like a weight for so long, but tonight, I feel like I can finally let it go. Not forget him, I'll never forget him, but stop letting the anger consume me." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "You helped me do that, Rebecca. You helped me remember there's more to life than revenge." "You helped me too," she said. "After my mother died, I felt so lost, like I didn't know who I was supposed to be. But you treated me like I was strong and capable and worth listening to. You gave me the chance to prove I could be those things. You've always been those things. I just saw what was already there." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Rebecca felt the now familiar warmth spread through her chest. This man, this good, steady, determined man, had become everything to her in such a short time. It should have scared her, but it didn't. It felt right. When they finally pulled apart, Isaac said, "I have something to ask you, and you can take all the time you need to answer. There's no pressure." "All right. I love you, Rebecca. I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you walked into the saloon and demanded to know about the Talbot Gang. You were so fierce and hurt and determined, and I thought, this woman is remarkable, and every day since has proved me right." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Isaac, let me finish. I know we haven't known each other long. I know my job isn't easy, and there will be times I have to leave. But I want to build a life with you. I want to make that cabin into a real home. I want to sit with you in the garden we planted and watch things grow. I want to be the man who gets to love you every day for the rest of my life." He took both her hands in his. "Will you marry me, Rebecca Lynn?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely, yes." He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around, and Rebecca laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, They were both grinning like fools. I don't have a ring yet, he said. I'll get you one, I promise. I don't need a ring, I just need you. But he got her a ring anyway, a simple gold band with a small diamond that he presented to her 3 days later. They were married a week after that in a small ceremony at the local church. Mrs. Patterson made the journey from Gold Creek to attend, and several of Isaac's fellow marshals came as well. It wasn't a large wedding, but it was perfect. Rebecca wore a new dress she had sewn herself, pale blue with white lace. Isaac wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Rebecca's heart skipped when she saw him waiting at the altar. The preacher asked if she took this man to be her husband, and Rebecca said, I do, in a clear, strong voice that echoed through the church. She meant it with every fiber of her being. Their first year of marriage was an adjustment. Isaac had been right about his job. He was often gone for days or even weeks at a time, tracking criminals across the territory. But he always came back to her, and Rebecca made their little cabin into a true home. She took the teaching position at the school and discovered she loved working with the children. They reminded her why the world was worth fighting for, worth making better and safer. When Isaac was home, they spent their evenings working in the garden, cooking meals together, talking about everything and nothing. They made love in their little bed with the curtains drawn and learned each other's bodies, each other's hearts. Rebecca wrote letters to old friends back east, telling them about her new life. She couldn't mention her mother without feeling a pang of grief, but it was a softer pain now. She could think about the good memories, the lessons her mother had taught her, without feeling like she was drowning in loss. She kept the fragments of her mother's letters in a small wooden box Isaac made for her. Sometimes she would take them out and look at them, remembering, but mostly she focused on the future they were building together. 18 months after their wedding, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. She told Isaac on a warm evening in late spring, out in the garden where the tomatoes were just beginning to ripen. He stared at her for a long moment, his eyes wide. Then he whooped with joy and picked her up carefully, spinning her gently before setting her back on her feet. A baby, he said, wonder in his voice. We're going to have a baby. Are you happy? Rebecca asked, even though she could clearly see that he was. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He knelt down and pressed his forehead against her still flat stomach. Hello in there, little one. I'm your father, and I love you already. Their son was born in December of 1876, during the first snowfall of winter. The labor was long and difficult, but when Rebecca finally heard that first cry, all the pain was forgotten. Isaac held the baby with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. He's perfect. Rebecca, he's absolutely perfect. They named him Thomas, after Isaac's lost partner. Thomas Harrison, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. He was loud and hungry and beautiful, and Rebecca fell in love with him instantly. Being a mother was harder than Rebecca had expected, but also more rewarding. She took a leave from teaching to care for Thomas, and Isaac arranged his schedule so he was home more often. He was a devoted father, walking the floor with Thomas when he cried at night, singing him lullabies in his surprisingly good voice, teaching him things from the moment he was born. He can't understand you yet, Rebecca said, laughing, when Isaac explained to 3-month-old Thomas how to read animal tracks. He will someday. I'm getting him ready. Life settled into a rhythm. The territory was growing and changing around them. More families were moving in. Towns were getting bigger. The wild lawlessness that had defined the region was slowly giving way to civilization. Isaac was promoted to senior marshal, which came with more responsibility, but also more respect and slightly better pay. Rebecca went back to teaching part-time when Thomas was a year old, and Mrs. Patterson's niece agreed to watch him during the day. When Thomas was 3, Rebecca got pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy was easier. Their daughter, Ellen Grace, was born on a beautiful spring morning in 1880. She had Rebecca's green eyes and Isaac's stubborn chin, and she was quieter than her brother had been, more observant. Their little cabin was feeling cramped with 4 of them, So Isaac and several neighbors built an addition, two more rooms, and a real kitchen. Rebecca planted flowers along the new porch and hung the wind chimes Isaac had bought her for her birthday. The children grew. Thomas was adventurous and brave, always exploring, always asking questions. Ellen was thoughtful and artistic, drawing pictures of everything she saw. Rebecca watched them play in the yard and felt overwhelming gratitude for the life she had built. One evening, when Thomas was 7 and Ellen was 4, the family sat together at dinner. Thomas was telling an elaborate story about the frog he had caught that day, and Ellen was drawing on a scrap of paper, and Isaac was listening to both of them with patient attention. Rebecca looked at her family and thought about that day in Gold Creek when she had hidden behind the rain barrel, watching outlaws burn her mother's letters. She thought about the rage and helplessness she had felt and the desperate determination that had led her to the saloon looking for justice. If someone had told her that that day would lead to this man, these children, this home, she wouldn't have believed them. But here she was, surrounded by love and laughter and the ordinary, beautiful chaos of family life. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, noticing her expression. "Just that I'm happy," Rebecca said. "Truly, deeply happy." He reached across the table and took her hand. "So am I. Every single day." That night, after the children were in bed, Rebecca and Isaac sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. It was the same thing they had done on countless other evenings, but it never got old. "Do you ever think about that night in the canyon?" Rebecca asked. "When we caught the Talbot Gang?" "Sometimes. Mostly I think about how I almost didn't let you come with me. How different things would have been if you had stayed in Gold Creek." "I wouldn't have stayed. I would have gone after them on my own, and I probably would have gotten myself killed." Isaac shuddered. "Don't even joke about that." "I'm not joking. I was that angry, that determined. But having you there kept me from doing something stupid. You tempered my rage with reason." She leaned against his shoulder. "We were good together from the start. We still are." The years continued to pass. Thomas grew into a tall, serious young man who decided to follow his father's footsteps and become a lawman. Ellen discovered a talent for music and spent hours at the piano they had managed to acquire from a family moving back east. Rebecca kept teaching, eventually becoming the headmaster of the school when the previous one retired. She loved shaping young minds, loved seeing children discover what they were capable of. Isaac, now in his mid-40s, moved into a position training new marshals rather than actively tracking outlaws. His body had accumulated too many injuries over the years: the bullet graze on his arm, a broken leg from a fall, various other scrapes and bruises, and he was ready to slow down. But he was still the same steady, determined man Rebecca had fallen in love with. His hair was starting to gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes, but to her, he was as handsome as ever. When Thomas was 20 and Ellen was 17, Rebecca got pregnant again, much to everyone's surprise. She was 42 years old and had thought her childbearing days were long behind her. "I'm going to be ancient by the time this one grows up," she said, laughing. "You're going to be wonderful," Isaac corrected, "just like you always are." Their second daughter, Mary Rose, was born healthy and strong in the spring of 1893. She had Isaac's blue eyes and Rebecca's dark hair, and she was loud and demanding from the moment she drew breath. Thomas and Ellen were besotted with their baby sister. Thomas, now working as a deputy in a neighboring town, visited every weekend to see her. Ellen, training to be a music teacher, sang to her constantly. Rebecca marveled at how different it was to have a baby at her age. She was more tired, certainly, but also more patient. She had learned so much from raising her older children, and she could apply all those lessons to Mary Rose. Isaac was utterly devoted to his youngest daughter. Rebecca would often find him holding her in the rocking chair he had made, telling her stories about her older siblings, about the territory's history, about her grandmother she would never meet. "You would have loved her," Rebecca heard him tell Mary Rose one evening. Your mother's mother. She was strong and brave and kind, just like your mama. She taught your mama to stand up for what's right, to never let anyone make her feel small. And your mama has passed those lessons on to you, even though you're too little to understand yet. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears listening to him. She thought about her mother often, wondered what she would think of the life Rebecca had built. She hoped her mother would be proud. Mary Rose grew into a spirited child, fearless and curious. By the time she was 5, Thomas was married with a child of his own, making Rebecca and Isaac grandparents. Ellen had married a music professor and was teaching at a school in Sacramento. The territory had changed dramatically since Rebecca first arrived. Nevada had been a state since 1864, and Carson City had grown from a rough frontier town into a proper capital. The wildness was mostly gone, replaced by law and order and civilization. Sometimes Rebecca missed those early days, the sense of possibility and danger, but mostly she was grateful for the peace and stability. She had seen enough violence and loss for one lifetime. When Mary Rose was 10, Isaac finally retired from the Marshal Service. They threw him a party, and marshals from all over the state came to honor him. There were speeches about his service, about the outlaws he had brought to justice, about the legacy he was leaving behind. Rebecca stood beside him, holding his hand, bursting with pride. This man had chosen her, had built a life with her, had loved her steadily and truly for nearly 25 years. She was the luckiest woman alive. In his speech, Isaac thanked his colleagues and the state. Then he turned to Rebecca. But most of all, I need to thank my wife. Rebecca came into my life when I was lost in grief and anger, and she showed me there was more to live for than revenge. She gave me a home, a family, a reason to keep going. Everything good in my life came from her. I love you, Rebecca Harrison. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Life after Isaac's retirement was quieter, but no less fulfilling. They traveled some, visiting Thomas and his family, staying with Ellen in California. They spent time with Mary Rose, teaching her everything they knew about strength and integrity and love. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Isaac and Rebecca returned to Gold Creek. The town had grown considerably, but Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was still there, now run by her niece's daughter. The saloon where they first really met had been turned into a general store. They visited the spot outside the boarding house where the outlaws had burned Rebecca's letters. There was a proper house there now, with a family living in it, children playing in the yard. It's strange, Rebecca said. That day was one of the worst of my life, but it led to all the best parts. Would you change it if you could? Isaac asked. If you could go back and prevent them from burning the letters, knowing it would mean we never met? Rebecca thought about it seriously. No, she said finally. As much as I wish I still had those letters, I wouldn't trade what we have. My mother would understand that. She wanted me to live, to be happy. I've done both. They stood there for a while, remembering, before walking back through the town they had once ridden through with 3 outlaws bound and under guard. The years continued their steady march forward. Thomas made them proud by becoming a federal marshal like his father. Ellen's children showed remarkable musical talent. Mary Rose, to everyone's surprise, decided to become a doctor, one of the first women in the state to pursue medical training. Rebecca and Isaac watched their children and grandchildren grow with satisfaction and joy. They had built something lasting, something good. Their love had created a whole family, multiple branches spreading out and growing strong. When Rebecca was 60 and Isaac 63, they took a trip back east to Philadelphia. Rebecca wanted to see her mother's grave, to tell her about the life she had lived. They stood in the cemetery under gray skies, and Rebecca told her mother everything, about Isaac, about their children, about the home they had built, about how her mother's lessons about strength and courage had saved her life and led her to love. I kept the fragments, Rebecca said quietly, of your letters. They're in a box on my dresser, and I look at them sometimes. But I don't need them like I used to. I carry you in my heart, Mama. in every choice I make, every lesson I teach, every moment of courage I manage to find. You're still with me." Isaac's arm around her shoulders tightened, and Rebecca leaned into his warmth. They stayed until the sun began to set, then walked back to their hotel through the streets where Rebecca had grown up. "It's so different from how I remember it," she said. "Smaller somehow." "That's because you've grown so much bigger," Isaac said. "You outgrew this place. You needed somewhere with room for all that strength and spirit." They returned to Nevada with lighter hearts. Life continued its beautiful, ordinary march. Grandchildren became teenagers, then adults. Great-grandchildren were born. The calendar pages turned. On their 40th anniversary, their entire family gathered at the house Isaac had built and Rebecca had made into a home. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled every room, spilled out into the yard. There was music and laughter and so much love, Rebecca thought her heart might burst from containing it all. Thomas stood up to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us that real strength isn't about violence or revenge. It's about building something good, something lasting. It's about loving each other through the hard times and celebrating the good ones. It's about making a home worth coming back to." He looked directly at Isaac and Rebecca. "Thank you for showing us what that looks like. Thank you for being the foundation we all built our lives on." Everyone drank, and Rebecca wiped away happy tears. She looked around at all these people, her family, and thought about that scared, angry young woman she had been 40 years ago. That woman couldn't have imagined all this. She had been focused on her pain, on her loss, on making someone pay for what they had taken from her. But in seeking justice, she had found so much more. She had found partnership and love. She had found purpose and home. She had found Isaac. That night, after everyone had gone to bed in various rooms throughout the house, Isaac and Rebecca sat on the porch like they had done thousands of times before. 40 years, Isaac said wonderingly. "How did we get so lucky?" "We weren't lucky," Rebecca corrected gently. "We worked for this. We chose each other every single day. We built this life together, piece by piece. You're right, and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." He took her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically. "I love you, Rebecca, more now than I did on our wedding day, which I wouldn't have thought possible. I love you too. Always have, always will." They sat together under the stars, the same stars they had looked at in a canyon years ago while guarding 3 outlaws. The same stars that had witnessed every step of their journey from that first meeting to this moment. Rebecca thought about the letters her mother had written, the ones that had burned to ash. She had grieved for them terribly at the time, and part of her would always wish she still had them. But she understood now that her mother's real gift hadn't been the paper and ink. It had been the lessons, the love, the foundation of strength that had allowed Rebecca to survive loss and seize opportunity when it appeared. Those letters had brought her and Isaac together. Their destruction had forged something in her, a determination, a willingness to fight for justice that had led her directly to the love of her life. Everything in life was connected, she had learned. Pain and joy, loss and gain, endings and beginnings. You couldn't have one without the other. The trick was learning to hold all of it, to let the grief exist alongside the happiness without letting either one consume you. She had learned that lesson well. Isaac squeezed her hand gently. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" "Just that I'm grateful," Rebecca said simply, "for all of it, the good parts and the hard parts, everything that brought us here." "Me too," Isaac said. He leaned over and kissed her temple softly. "Me too." As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, they sat together in the home they had built, surrounded by the family they had created, held together by the love they had chosen. It was everything Rebecca's mother could have wanted for her daughter. It was everything Rebecca had wanted for herself, even when she hadn't known it yet. The outlaws had burned her letters, trying to destroy something precious. Instead, they had set her on a path that led to everything she held dear. Looking back, Rebecca could see her mother's hand in all of it, guiding her toward this life, this love, this happiness. "Thank you, Mama," she whispered into the night. And somewhere, in the space between the stars and memory, Rebecca thought she heard her mother's voice whisper back, "You did good, my darling girl. You did so very good."